Grant, welcome. I'm really keen to talk about the fundamentals of marketing. I want to dive straight in. So, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see marketing professionals make and continue to make at the minute?
Wow, God, that's a big question. Oh, there's so many. I don't know where to start. I think there's quite a few things. The basic principle is that I think too many people think of marketing as a tactical discipline and not a strategic discipline. So I always say to people, marketing is fundamentally a strategic discipline, and then obviously you use tactics to bring that to life. So that's almost the first mistake, that people, they go straight into the tactics. Oh, should we do some Facebook advertising? What about our PPC strategy and those kind of things? And they haven't actually got the fundamentals right. And without that, you're in trouble. And when I think about the fundamentals, I think, who's your target marketplace? What's the messages that you're using to get to that target market? What's the right channel strategy for you? What's the offer? What does the customer journey look like? Where's the engagement piece? When do you bring them to purchase? And these are all strategic things that you need to sort out first before you get into tactics. So there's a lot there.
Yeah, it's funny because I actually enjoyed reading your latest book, The Myths of Marketing.
Yes,
and you talk about the problem is so many marketeers, or people that call themselves marketeers, they're just really good at one tactic, which could be pay-per-click or SEO, and that they've gone deep into that discipline, but they just lack that sort of broader piece, which means that, when there are problems for a client and, on overall campaign, it's kind of like when you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And talk to us about the sort of problems you get brought in to fix, and then dealing with marketing teams and CMOs, etc.
Yeah, well, it's exactly that. It's really interesting what you say, because it's true. So someone might be a brilliant practitioner at PPC, or amazing at Facebook advertising, or really a master of LinkedIn, or whatever it is. And the problem is because so many people, I just want the outcome, let's do a Facebook campaign and we're going to get loads of customers, or whatever it is, that they go to these practitioners who are often very good at what they do. So they know the tactic inside out, and they're really good practitioners at that particular channel of marketing, whatever it is. But exactly what you just said, that there's no overarching strategy, and therefore what happens is those people end up advising the client on the messaging, the call to action, and those kind of things. And it's completely wrong, and often therefore ineffective, not because the management, the channel was ineffective, but because, the positioning and strategy wasn't right. And second of all, sometimes people are a victim of their own success. So they go and use that channel, and that Facebook channel works well because they've got a practitioner that knows how to manipulate it. But there's nothing else they can do with the brand, because actually the messaging's too one-dimensional. They don't really understand the customer base they're going to. So they end up kind of down a rabbit hole with nowhere to go. And often I end up being called in to kind of zone back out and say, hold on a minute, your positioning's wrong. There's no competitive advantage here. The value proposition's not right. We need to look at this strategy better, because as you well know, Marcus, a multi-channel strategy always outperforms a one-channel strategy, which is often what these people have. So often I end up getting called in to fix the problem, but the problem is there's no strategy. So I end up having to do the strategy with them, but they don't know what the problem is. The problem is it's not working. We're not getting what we need to get out of this. We've been pigeonholed in this way, and now it's causing us problems. But the overarching issue was they built something for a channel, not for a market.
And why do you think that is? Do you think that the marketing manager or CMO is brought in and they've come from a particular discipline, or they're just, as Mark Ritson would say, an untrained marketeer? So they come in and they've got their preferred channel because that's what they feel comfortable with, and they put together a strategy around what they know rather than actually what's possible to succeed.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think all of the things you just suggested are correct at different times. I think one of the biggest challenges we see in marketing today, I don't know if you see this a lot, is that essentially, because we have so many tools and channels today which are measurable, People are absolutely focused on, oh, well, let's do this because we can track how number of hits we get, cost per acquisition, all of these wonderful things, which at a certain juncture is all useful tools. No one's saying you shouldn't be measuring activity and understanding it, but then all the value of crafting a message, understanding a marketplace, understanding your target markets, how you segment it, what the message should be, how that marketing funnel goes, what those different channels and what we expect from them, and obviously the overall brand strategy, which is often completely missing. I mean, there just isn't one. All of that good marketing discipline just gets ignored because everybody's so focused on, well, if we do Facebook, how much is it going to cost per acquisition? How many clicks do we get for spend? And all of those type things. And I think that while I don't want to come across as kind of devaluing measurement, because I'm not. Measurement's important. I think that it's become so prevalent. Everything is so trackable and so measurable that people forget to do the things that aren't. And that becomes a real issue. And ironically, it's the things that you do that aren't necessarily measurable straight away, which will actually have the biggest impact on making sure the measurable stuff works.
And I think what your point towards perhaps is a short-termism, right? Because the numbers are in front of us. And yes, some of them are vanity matrix, and I get annoyed when people saying, oh, we've got this many more impressions with your ads and all the rest of it. And obviously as a performance marketer, I'm like, okay, but I want to see, how many sales, the bottom line. But actually, I'd love you to talk a little bit more, because I think a lot of people watching this are going to be in my sort of world of the sort of, funnel performance side of things, of a brand strategy. Because actually, from the data I've seen, long term, actually, like you say, that the brand thing might be harder to measure in the short run, but actually it builds up something that's really powerful that actually increases lifetime value of customers. So I'd love for you to talk about that, how you come in and perhaps have dealt with situations where there is a lot of metrics, but they obviously bring you in because they are lacking that brand strategy.
Yeah, so interesting. So a couple of things I'd say. All good marketing, in my opinion, starts with great segmentation and targeting. And actually, it's amazing to me how few marketers, I think sometimes it can be embarrassing if you say to marketers, what is the difference between segmentation and targeting? And they don't know. And you say, okay, so segmentation is how you cut the cake. Segmentation is if you have a marketplace, and that marketplace can be, the northwest of England, it could be the whole of the UK, it could be the whole of Europe, or a global strategy. It doesn't matter. But how do you cut the cake? How do you look at segmenting your marketplace? And funnily enough, not many companies that I experience, and sometimes I'm talking at some, quite big brands, have spent enough time, in my opinion, seeing how they cut that cake. So, what happens if we stop? Because what people do is they tend to cut the cake by demography and firmography. So, all the characteristics of a human being, gender, ethnicity, age, family situation, income bracket, geographical location, all of those things that everybody knows. And then from a firmographics point of view, vertical marketplace, number of employees, company turnover, etc., etc. They're all the basic segmentations that we all are well aware of. But then layer on top of that psychographics, attitudes, interests, and opinions, and then behaviors. And then you start to create some really interesting opportunities, because actually how you cut the cake can really change the way that you decide to talk about yourselves, the message that you put, the context in which that message comes. And, in a world of vanilla, in a world where let's be honest about this, there are not many companies out there with true differentiation. There are some, but there aren't many.
Yeah.
And I often say, sometimes you can differentiate by what you do. And if you truly can, that's an incredible thing to be able to do, but it's rare. But often you don't differentiate by what you do, you differentiate by who you do it for. And understanding how you cut the cake and then who you're going to target through that is the beginning of putting together a brand strategy, because then you start to say, okay, what's the message going to be? What do we need to stand for in the marketplace? How do we position ourselves in the marketplace? But all good marketing starts with understanding how you segment a market and how you target it. And there are very few companies that I come across that have done that right.
And it's interesting. That's one of the myths you talk about, actually, that most people assume that segmentation is, demographics or firmography, etc. And I think there's a brilliant quote in your book where you quote, I think, the vice president of Netflix says, well, we've got, I think, 19-year-olds watching Dance Mums and 73-year-olds watching Breaking Bad. So if we just did it by age, then we're missing it. And I think what you're talking about is something so much deeper. It's intent. It's where they are in, the season of seasonality, or what they're going through in their lives. At that point, they need the message to then engage with your brand. And I think it's interesting, because it seems to me like engaging with your content, Grant, is the first time I've come across this. To be honest, to really get, I perhaps believe that myth is all about sort of the demographics and the firmographics, but actually looking at, and I guess it's not entirely correct, because obviously as a digital marketeer, I do know about sort of different sort of buying signals of intent of putting in keywords and etc. But I don't think I've sat down with our clients and gone that deep with it. And I imagine that probably most people you engage with never go that deep. They may have a sort of a peripheral awareness, but not actually get deep into cutting the cake in a way that allows you to go back to those fundamentals of right message, right person, right time. That one being the right time when there's an emotional impulse and all of a sudden you're there. So that's interesting. So is that a big piece that that when you come in and work with firms that you really help with, because they've probably got a very light understanding like I had?
Yeah, it's huge, because for me, and you'll understand this as a performance marketer, absolutely 100%, is what happens is if your segmentation, now it's not wrong, because most of the companies I work with are going concerns, and they're successful. They want to be more successful, but they're successful, So it's not a question of being wrong, but it's being a question of not being quite right. So what happens is, right, your segmentation isn't quite right, which then means your targeting is not quite right, which means your messaging is not quite right, which means your channel strategy is not quite right. And suddenly what you're doing is, at every stage of the process, you're iterating another level of wrong into the process, or error into the process, whichever way you see it. So by the time you get to the end, you say, actually, the marketing that we're doing is really not nearly as effective as it should be. Because if you get your segmentation absolutely spot on, and then you go, right, we've segmented. I always talk about segmentation is how you cut the cake. So if you cut the cake and you go, right, based on the way that we've cut the cake now, I think there are some amazing opportunities with these 3 slices who represent 3 market segments. So now we're going to say, right, we're going to really target those segments, because that's where we think is our sweet spot. And now we're going to get, because we understand those segments intimately and we really get it, the messaging is just spot on, and the channel strategy is spot on, and the context in which we're targeting them is spot on. And suddenly your marketing, the outcomes, the effectiveness of your marketing can go up 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%, because all you've done is taken out the error at every stage. But those errors will really, really kill you. And as I said, it's not that you're wrong what you're doing, it's just that it's not right. And as you iterate through the process, you become quite ineffective without realizing.
It's the compound effect. I mean, the way we look at marketing at Fountain is sort of what we call full funnel, right? And we get spreadsheets, and you increase the conversion rate each stage of the funnel just by a little bit, and by the end, it's significantly better. And it's really powerful what you said about the iteration of wrong. So obviously each stage is wrong, and you get it so far off kilter that it's a very ineffective marketing strategy. I mean, for anyone watching, Grant, obviously they can get in touch with you, but is there anything you could give them? Because I think a lot of people will be listening to this going, gosh, I've got a blind spot here. We need to revisit the segmentation that we've done, because we've just gone, okay, we want people in this part of the country, at this age, these interests, etc., Guardian readers, of teacher, whatever, right? But they haven't really sort of looked at slicing the cake in the way you're talking about going deeper and sort of intent, personality, those sort of psychographics. I mean, where would you recommend people start?
Yeah, so I mean, it can be different for different companies, but giving a general kind of overview, and hopefully this is useful to many of the people watching, what I would say is the place to go is go to your client bank and cut off your client bank at the top 10, 15, 20, 25, possibly even 30% of customers. Obviously, it depends how many customers you've got as to where you want to cut that off. And it's interesting when you say cut it off at your best customers, even that exercise is interesting because you say, well, are my best customers by profitability? Are they by retention? Are they actually by, all of those? So sometimes what you want to do is actually sort your customer base by different criteria. Let's sort out the database by retention, sort out the database by spend, sort about the database by variety of product or service that they purchase. So, and what you start to do is you go, actually, these customers keep coming up to the fore. So these represent our best 15% of customers or 20% of customers, whichever way you slice and dice the data, as it were. And the reason why you want to do that, and it sounds incredibly obvious, although it's amazing how few people do it, is because all marketing costs time and money.
Yeah.
So then you're going to say, right, if we're going to spend time and money, why don't we go and try and win the best 20% of customers we've ever had, and more like that, rather than make it random. And actually, we end up winning quite a lot of customers that are costing us money, aren't making us great money, aren't profitable. You know, why would you spend time and money to go and win customers that you don't really want? So take the top 15, 20, 25, 30%, whatever it is, understand that, and then take that data and say, where are the patterns? Where are the patterns on the demography and firmography, which is level 1?
Yeah.
But where are the patterns on the attitudes, interests, and opinions? What are the attitudes? And by the way, companies have cultures. So companies have attitudes. Companies have things they value. Companies have things they care about. So, you know, what are the common attitudes of the best clients we ever have? What are the common interests of the best companies, best clients we ever have? What are the common goals and ambitions of the best clients we ever have? You know, what is, I must have done this exercise hundreds of times, and I've never yet had a client where there wasn't patterns in the data. And the problem is sometimes it can be a bit of a ball ache, if I'm honest, trying to find it. So, you know, sometimes it takes a while. And here's the worst thing, and I'll warn everybody that's watching this out there. When you found the patterns in the data, it's always obvious. But that's afterwards. And therefore, the most frustrating thing is, I'll give you an example. I work with a customer, I can't name them, but I work with a customer. Fortunately for me, I was working mainly with the marketing team, but the CEO wanted to be involved, which was a very, very happy accident, because we did this exercise and we came across this pattern in the data, which was an incredible opportunity, we believe, for the customer. But at the same time was obvious, but only after the fact. No one realized it before. So I went back and reported it to the board, and the CEO was very keen that I did the reporting, not him, because he wanted it to be independent, etc., etc. So I delivered the report to the board. And when I delivered the report to the board, of course, all the board members looked at me and went, well, that's so fairly obvious. And the CEO went nuts, because it was like, yes, it is obvious now he's told you. But if he'd come into the board yesterday before he told you and said, what do you think is the core element that unites all our top 20% of customers? They wouldn't have had a clue. No. And of course, but it's always obvious after the fact. So the warning I'm giving any marketer or board level person watching this is that it's a thankless task. But when you've got that data and you go, right, this is the thing, this is the attitude that unites all our customers or whatever else, it's a tremendous opportunity in terms of positioning. It's a tremendous opportunity in terms of messaging. And I'll give you an example. We had a customer that we were working with. It doesn't really matter what they do, but the thing that really united all of their customers was a common challenge. And the common challenge was these customers had a story that they wanted to tell and they couldn't get out into the market. And actually, that became our messaging. Yeah. If you've got a story to tell, we're the people to call. If you haven't, don't get in touch. We're not interested in working with you. And actually, they grew like 30% in the next 18 months.
Yeah.
Because they'd hit upon a challenge. No one was segmenting in that way. They were segmenting on, we work with companies with over 500 employees and this way and that way and everything else. And it just created a different kind of message and a different kind of opportunity and a different kind of context. And so the message was different. The channel was different. The context in which we approach customers was different. And that's the key to getting this right. And that's, in my opinion, the best starting place. Start with your customers and then work back to you.
But what you said there, because it drives a message that then can be, repeated throughout the funnel, and will just increase the conversion rate of the best customers. So you've already got the rich data there. And it's funny because we talk a lot about 80-20 sales and marketing and Pareto's law, and people's eyes tend to glaze over, and then they just say, look, are all customers created equal? All your customers equally as well? No, obviously there's some that are amazing. Okay, well, let's target them. And I think once you get that sort of buy-in, then actually it's fascinating. But I love the level you're going with this, Grant. Actually, it's so powerful, because the thing you were saying again, the iteration of getting it wrong, and then obviously after it's that 30% growth after 18 months. You then have a series of case studies of, well, this is actually because the thankless task bit, people will be thinking, well, okay, yeah, we kind of get that, and obviously, well, why weren't you doing it before then? But no, it's really interesting, Grant, I have to say. And you must, you've probably never come across a business that's doing this to the degree that they could, right? Have you ever walked in and you've been like, oh, actually, you guys have got this. Your segmentation is spot on, and you've really got the attitudes, the interest, the opinions piece down. Because for me, it seems like everyone just stays on level one and just goes, right, now we've done that, and then hops to the next bit, which again, I feel there's a sort of cognitive bias among marketers to chase the shiny. Do you know what I mean? To chase the bit that feels exciting, which is, let's start chucking some traffic, let's get some creative out there, rather than doing the hard graft and laying the solid foundations for a good campaign.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And here's what's really interesting, and I don't know whether people have thought about it like this or not before, but most people in marketing know marketing to a point, right? Most people in their business understand their business, and they understand their customers to a point. And therefore, it's very unusual, almost unheard of, to walk into any successful business and their marketing be a complete disaster and completely wrong. Because if their marketing was complete disaster and completely wrong, and they had no idea who the customers was, and no idea what the message should be, and no idea where they add value, and they wouldn't be a company, they'd be bust, because the commercial world is not a fairly unforgiving one. So here's what's interesting. At the broad sort of basic brushstroke level, most people get it broadly right. And yet the marketing's underperforming, and they're not happy, it's not as effective as it should be, and they don't feel they get the best bang for their buck and all of those kind of things. And you can use sports analogies for this as well, because, if you take the top 10 teams in the Premiership, or the top best international sides at football, or whatever it is, at broad brushstrokes, all these players can play.
Yeah.
They know how to play the game. They're all top. If you're playing in a top 10 English side in the Premier League, or one of the top 10 international sides in world football or whatever, you're pretty useful, right? So then what it is actually, it's the detail that matters, because it's the details that sort out the great companies from everybody else. And when you start going to this granular detail of segmentation, then what does that mean for our messaging, and what does it mean? What you're doing is you're working at those incremental levels, but they make all the difference. So I always say to people, it's an analogy, but I think it's one that you'll understand, and certainly many people watching will understand. Is, I don't know if anybody remembers as they were a kid. Some people may do it now, but I must admit I haven't done this since I was a kid. But when you're a kid and you used to colour with pencils, and your pencil would be getting a bit blunt, and therefore it was getting frustrating, and eventually you'd get a sharpener, and you'd put the pencil in the sharpener, and you'd sharpen it, and then you go, right?
Yeah.
The difference between colouring or writing with a blunt pencil and a sharp pencil is chalk and cheese. In terms of output, it's completely different. The whole experience of having a blunt pencil is horrible, and then having a sharp pencil. So from an output perspective, it's not comparable. But from an input perspective, you know what changes? 2 turns of a sharpener.
Yeah,
that's it. 2 turns of a sharpener is the input, and the output's completely different. And that's why I think marketing for many people is a difficult discipline, because actually the difference between doing it okay and doing it amazingly well is that. But those two, it's the detail that matters. Sometimes I'll go into in fact, I was working with a client this morning where this happened. I'll go into a client and I'm looking at their messaging, and we've done the segmentation piece. We did that already. And I've done the segmentation piece. Now I'm looking at their messaging, and all I did today with them is change 3 words. Now, I did it this morning, so there's no, there's no case study yet to say whether it's going to work or not. But I think that change of 3 words is going to make a massive difference to response levels, to penetration in the market, to how their message resonates with people. And I know the frustrating thing with that for them, I know, because I was working with the team this morning, is, Grant, all we did was change 3 words. So yeah, but those 3 words are going to make all the difference, because you're not that bad. The broad brushstrokes level, you've got it right. But actually getting that language absolutely nailed, so it completely resonates emotionally with the customer the first time they deliver, that's going to be the difference between a 2% response and a 7% response or whatever. And of course, from a results situation, then it's completely different.
Yeah.
And that's what people find frustrating, I think, about marketing.
Yeah, I think they miss the fact that when you look at it in percentages, it almost makes it easier. If you've got, for every 100 people, 2 of them will take the next step, and the other 98 will just leave. And then going from 2 up till 7, so it's still 93 will leave, but it's actually tripled in its effectiveness, or over tripled. And I think that's the thing that people don't always get when you start looking at like percentages of pools of sets of 100 people. So I've explained it. They've gone, oh gosh, yeah, going from 2% to say 6%. It won't take a huge amount of tweaking to just capture, an extra 4 or 5 people out of a set of 100. Those 3 words will do that. But then over a massive set of thousands of people, it multiplies. And that's the difference between, a failing campaign that doesn't get the return on investment and one that does. One thing that you've said, Grant, which has always stuck with me, actually, I sort of think we spoke a few years ago, and you were talking a bit about this, which is how I think in the digital world, all businesses are essentially a media company. You have to be your own sort of media company. And if that's still the sort of narrative that you're sharing with people, I'd love for you to talk a bit more about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, 100%. So what I say is, look, we've already mentioned a multi-channel strategy is always better than a single channel strategy. So, to only use one channel to market is a crazy thing to do. But I always say to people, when you look at where your customers are, where they hang out, where they go in that first stage of the buyer journey, although I'm not suggesting online should be your only route to market, for many, many companies, it's a fundamental one. It's a vital one. And once you venture into the online world, you have essentially become a media business. Because if you take, I would imagine many of the people watching this are based in the UK. So let's use the UK as the example. If you take the BBC fundamentally is an infrastructure. It's a set of cables with a license to broadcast. What makes the BBC compelling or not, depending on your view, is the programs that it makes. It's the content that it produces. And then if you think about yourselves as businesses, right? You may have a website, you may have Facebook, you may have Instagram, you have Snapchat, YouTube, whatever the right vehicles for your business and your marketplace, that's fine. The reality is, if you take your website is dead space on a thing called the World Wide Web. Your Facebook page is dead space on the biggest social network on planet Earth. Your YouTube channel is dead space on the biggest video network on planet Earth. Your LinkedIn page and profiles are dead space on the biggest business network on planet Earth. What makes any of those things work or not is whatever you choose to post. And therefore the application is different, clearly, from the BBC, but the principles are the same. You're only as good as the content you create. And because digital the online world allows you to engage and scale at a level that other channels don't. It becomes vital, but the only way you can make that work is if you become a media business, or if you recognize that you're a media business, because what the online world gives you is two things that you can't get in the analog world, which doesn't mean, by the way, that's not a rant against analog marketing. Should you be doing direct mail? Should you be on, should you be doing billboards or advertising in print media? Quite possibly, depending on your audience, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is that in the analog world, you play for eyeballs. If you send out 20,000 direct mails, it's going to cost you less money than if you send out 100,000 direct mails, because you've got 80,000 more postage to pay straight away, right? So in the analog world, you paid for eyeballs. In the digital world, you don't in the same way. So, you can put out a video and it can cost you £200 to make, and you could get 20 people watching that video. And if you build up a viewership and a database and people that love you, you could put out the same video a year later and have 10,000 people or 20,000 people watching that video. The cost of the video is still 200 quid. It's not costing you any more or less. So the online world gives you a scalability to your marketing that you don't necessarily have in analog, which again doesn't mean you shouldn't be using analog tools. It just means that digital gives you something that you won't get from other places, and you need to use that. But it means being a media channel and understanding that. And the other thing that is very, very important that I don't think everybody gets is that I really believe that the most precious resource on planet Earth today is attention. Right? Because we live in a world of information overload, because everybody's got a channel today, because the media businesses are playing the game they've always played. In fact, if you look at traditional media companies, whether it's the Guardian with their huge website or the BBC with its iPlayer and its more digital channels and its apps, etc., the output of these media businesses is bigger than ever before. And then there's players into the marketplace that didn't exist 20 years ago, be that Amazon Prime or Netflix or the Disney Plus offering or whatever. So they're putting out more than ever before. You've got every organization and business on planet Earth with its own channels now, as we've just discussed. Every individual potentially is a media company in their own right, or a media entity in their own right, because they've got channels. So we live in a world of information overload. The direct result of living in a world, of abundance of information is we live in a world of scarcity of attention. Attention is the most precious resource on planet Earth today. And in the analog world, you have to pay for the attention every time you get it. So I can send a direct mail, I've got to pay for it every time. I put an advert in a newspaper, I've got to pay for it every time. Online allows you to engage customers and build an audience, over time, where you can keep people's attention cost effectively, because it doesn't cost you for every engagement. And therefore, I really believe that online is fundamental to any marketing strategy as a big part of it, not the only part of it. But the need to build audience and retain that audience makes you a media business, whether you like it or not. And some people will love the idea of that, and some people will hate the idea of that. But it's very, very important. And by the way, becoming more and more important, because we're not going to get less digital in the next decade. And I don't think we're going to have more attention in the next decade. We're going to have less and less. And by the way, it's very important that people understand this, I think. So let me share it with people, because I hear this, or I don't know if you hear this, Marcus, but I hear this all the time. People say, I don't understand, with all this technology, we should have more hours in the day, not less hours in the day. And it's fundamentally flawed thinking. We know it's not true, by the way. We've all got less hours in the day than we've ever had. We're all more time pushed and stressed than we've ever been. But the question is why? So people have to understand why. And the reason why is very, very simple. Everything in the world has expanded apart from time. So I'm going to show my age now, and maybe a couple of younger viewers, I'll leave them behind slightly. But I remember when I ran home from school in the winter time. Summer was slightly different, but in the wintertime, there's cold January day when it was already dark by the time I got home from school, that kind of thing. And, in those cold January days when it was already dark, there were only two things to do when I got home. One was called BBC One and the other one was called ITV, pretty much, right? And, you know, if it was a day where there were programs on I didn't like, so at the risk of upsetting someone that's watching this, I just didn't get on with Blue Peter. Blue Peter wasn't for me. I didn't like it, right? So if I ran home and it was a Blue Peter day, you know, that was a bit, my heart sank. It's like, oh no, it's Blue Peter. What am I going to do now? Kind of thing. You know, I might have to read a book or something. Whereas, you know, if I ran home from school, it was a Grange Hill day, which I loved, right? If it was a Grange Hill day, then that was happy days because, you know, I was ready set to watch Grange Hill. My kids have never experienced that. The idea that you could run home from school and there's nothing to watch is just insanity. Because if Netflix never made another program, I still probably couldn't get through everything that's on there that I want to see. So in other words, everything in our world has expanded except time, because we've still got the same 24 hours a day, 7 days in a week that we had, you know, thousands of years ago. So we are more time poor than ever before because everything's expanded in our lives apart from that. And therefore, the ability to build an audience and engage it and retain attention in a cost-effective way is absolutely vital in any marketing strategy at all.
And that's the thing, because I mean, we talk to clients a lot about that, especially in the B2B space. They're saying, you know, like, we've got some content we want to put out, and we have to be quite honest with them and say, actually, you know, like, there's two types of content. There's blockbuster content that is shared, i.e. it creates an emotional spike in the person who's consuming it and they go, oh, it's brilliant, and they'll share it. And then there's the other 99% of content that's dead on arrival, that's just like, oh, all right, you know, and it gets 5 likes on LinkedIn because they're your friends and they'll like it anyway. You know, and the interesting thing is, having sort of gone in and studied the viral bloggers, actually the blockbuster content, there's no secrets. There's hundreds of hours of research put into it. There's, you know, serious production time and investment. And is what you're saying, Grant, is that you're competing with attention, not just on other things on LinkedIn, but also Netflix, YouTube. Like, there's so much, and people just need stuff that is going to press an emotional button, be relevant. It goes back to the first thing you're saying about the segmentation. If you've got that piece right, if you truly understand the desires of your target audience and their problems that your product or service is solving, and then you can create content that speaks to that conversation they're having in their head, adds value in some way, or talks something similar that adds value on an emotional level, so much so that they want to share it with other people, then you're perhaps onto a winner. But the thing is that the sort of narrative we have with Fountain and clients is the content blockbuster. And, you know, there's some stuff that, you know, for example, this I think is very, very good content, and we'll splice it up and we'll send it to the right people at the right time. But then there's bigger pieces that we work on that we'll just, you know, we'll pay researchers, do hundreds of hours of research. We're doing a lot of that on the third-party cookie stuff at the minute that I know you've all seen on Friday. Google's given us a gift of time of 1.5 years to get it right. But what we'd noticed is that lots of our competitors and lots of marketeers were just putting out a random bit of content that someone in their pay-per-click department, you know, had just written on a Friday afternoon, saying, here's our position on third-party cookies. You know, and there's always hyperbole as well, like, you know, SEO is dead and all the rest of it. There's people making clickbaity statements. But then again, if you go back and look at the content that I would share, the content that's really, you know, that gets the most sort of virality, you can see it's been really well researched. It's had hours and hours of time put into it. And it's actually there, again, there's something that I think, a theme that's sort of coming out from this conversation of long-term thinking, you know, of actually investing in really, you know, understanding the people you want to speak to, and then creating something that's really of value to them, which, you know, can't be done quickly, can't be done, you know, with a, you know, get it out in a week and split test it and let's do some sort of, you know, some metrics. There's actually something there that's just more solid and will actually stand the test of time. But I don't know how that lands for you, Grant.
Yeah, no, I think you said two things that I think are really, really interesting, which I'd pick up on. The first one is, yeah, it goes back to the segmentation and targeting again, because, you know, I always say, right, the bigger the audience you go after, the more vanilla you become.
Yeah.
You know, so you know, if you go after a very targeted, you know, segmentation, and you don't need to eat one slice of the cake, you might have 3 different slices, but very specific ones. But, you know, relevance is interesting. The more vanilla, the more, the wider you make the audience, the more vanilla you become, and the more like everybody else you become, and therefore you're not interesting, you're not relevant, and I just get dismissed. And what people miss is there's only two ways to be: hyper relevant or a massive brand. Amazon started out in the world being hyper relevant because they were a bookshop. Their initial go-to-market was the world's biggest bookstore. So if you're a book lover, Amazon was really interesting. If you didn't like books, they didn't even make your brain power because it was irrelevant to you. Yeah. Of course, today Amazon sell everything for everyone, which is not a particularly compelling go-to-market message. We're Amazon, we sell everything for everybody. But of course, where relevance is lost, brand takes over. Yeah. Because if you went into that, if I went to my local high street now and stopped 10 random people and said, name me an e-commerce platform, I'd be very surprised if less than 9 out of 10 didn't say Amazon as the first one. So the brand recognition takes over from everything else. So the first thing you've said, which I 100% is, goes back to the segmentation and targeting, which is, what I said, all good marketing starts there, and making sure that you're putting something together that's really relevant and really interesting for your marketplace, however you've defined that. But the second thing you said that I'm going to pick up on, because we haven't covered it yet, and it is so fundamental, and it may mess with a few people's heads when they get around this. My background is behavioral psychology, and we know for a fact today, we've learned more about the human brain in the last 50, 60 years than we knew in the previous 5,000. And we know that, human beings have two systems of thinking, conveniently called system 1 and system 2. And system 1 is the subconscious mind. People often think of that as emotional, which is fine to a point. It's not quite right, but that's okay. And then system 2 is the conscious mind, which again, people think of as the rational, which again is not 100% right, but that's okay. But here's the thing, 90 to 95%, depending on which psychologist you ask, but they're the parameters of debate, whether it's 90 or 95%, right? 90 to 95% of everything we do is system 1. Only 5 to 10% is system 2. So here's the question. When you look at your marketing, to anybody out there, how much of what you're doing right now plays to system 2, which is the rational, and how much plays to system 1? Because almost any company I ever come into contact with, they're definitely messaging for system 2. They've got the benefits of why you should buy from them, the special offers, the reasons you should buy, the reasons you should do it now, the reasons why they're better than their competition, what they see as their differentiators, USPs, whatever you want to call it. They've got all of that messaging all sort of lined up to a greater or lesser extent, how effective that is, depending on targeting segmentation again. But they've got all that lined up, but that's all system 2. And then you say, okay, but what emotionally are you delivering to your customer? What's the feeling you want to evoke? What's the emotion that you're selling? And what does that mean for the language, the imagery, the way that you put messaging across, the way that you want someone to feel emotionally when they engage with you? Most of the companies I come into contact with, they haven't even left first base. They've got no idea. And when you're talking about that blockbuster content and you're talking about it having to resonate emotionally, which is 100% correct, I agree. Most people haven't even defined it. They don't even know emotionally what they're trying to deliver to their customers. And if you don't understand that, how do I need a customer to feel? Do I need them to feel confident, ambitious, empowered, excited, reassured, safe, comfortable? What's the emotion that I'm trying to evoke? And if I don't know that, then I'm leaving it completely to chance. And I may deliver it out of fluke. But, and it's very few companies understand emotionally what they're delivering to their customers.
And I think the reason is they're writing from the rational, right? So they're using their rational brain to write, and they're assuming they're speaking to another rational person who is sitting there with their rational brain lit up, ready to consume your content. But of course, that's not the reality. That actually we are more in that primitive mind when we're scrolling. I always think it from the triune brain theory, and people talk about the reptilian and the mammalian deep. And I think you're speaking to the reptilian and the mammalian brain. You're speaking to that deeper part, and we can see that from people's behavior because people click on weird stuff and watch pictures of cute dogs and cat videos. And if you look at the sort of stuff, if before the internet was invented, if you sat people around and said, what do you think people will consume on the internet? And they'll be like, oh, they'll be reading about news and things that they find interesting. But actually, if you look at what most people click on, it is all the sort of clickbaity stuff, which presses the emotional buttons, and, using things like scarcity or intrigue, or, like, and it's pressing on those bits. But it's so true. And it's funny, as you say this, Scott, I think actually, I know this and I do go for the emotion, but I think there's so much deeper we can go with it. You almost want to start with the emotion first, rather than kind of craft a message using the logical part of your brain and then go, right, what emotions are we selling? Is it sort of, confidence and security and safety or whatever, and try and get those words and images in to evoke it. But actually, if 90% of it is going to be emotion, because there's that old adage on selling that people buy on emotion, then justify it after with logic. If you ask someone why they bought something, they'll give you a rational reason. But the truth is, in their experience, it just felt right. Yeah, I feel like this is going to solve my problem. Interesting enough, when you think of all the stuff you've bought and you've regretted, or decisions you've made and you've regretted, actually the gut instinct isn't that powerful, really. There's a lot of cognitive biases that kick in, as obviously you know about, talking about Daniel Kahneman and systems 1 and 2. That's fascinating. The final thing, because I'm mindful of time, Grant, and I really want to pick up on, is obviously you've got the Sticky Marketing website, and you have interviewed so many fascinating marketeers and incredible people. Obviously, we talked about our good friend Drayton Bird just before we turned the recording on. But yes. Is there who influences you? Who inspires you? Who have you interviewed that you found fascinating, that you think people watching this should follow and find interesting, as well as marketeers and as people in business?
Yeah, interesting. So, I mean, for me, and this isn't even a marketing point, actually, although it plays to marketing. So I always say to people, business is a contact sport. You can't sit in a room on your own and be in business. It doesn't work. All right. And one of the most depressing things, it's very interesting. When I go into a marketing department, I can assess how good that marketing department is with one question, and it's nothing to do with their marketing. I just ask them this question. I'm talking about some big departments sometimes at major brands, I just say, when was the last time you spoke to a prospect or customer? And if they have to think about it, I panic. I think, oh no, I'm in a big trouble here. If they look at me and go, well, this morning, Grant, last night, yesterday, then that's fine. But when they go, oh, I don't know, when was it? Because marketing fundamentally is about seeing the world through your customer's eyes. How do they perceive the world? What's their challenges, their context, their ideas, their hopes, their beliefs? That's what marketing is. It's about seeing the world through your customer's eyes. And therefore, all business is a human sport. Marketing, essentially is exactly that. And therefore, for me, the most fascinating people that I ever sort of come into contact with, interview, speak to, or read or listen to are the behavioral psychologists, because I find it incredible. So Daniel Kahneman, Antonio Damasio, Dan Ariely, I mean, there are loads of them.
Yeah.
But the thing that I find really odd, and I suppose the older I get, I think the odder I find it. And I suppose it's loaded in a way, because like you said, we've all got cognitive biases, and me included. Yeah. But what I find interesting is, if you get into marketing and you're trained well, you'll learn about targeting, you'll learn about segmentation, you'll learn about brand, you'll learn about market positioning, you'll learn about messaging, you'll learn about channel strategy, you'll learn about all these disciplines that are important in marketing. But what nobody studies is people.
Yeah. And
people are the source material. At the end of the day, if you're in marketing and sales, you're in the business of changing behavior. Because those customers and prospects that you're talking to weren't using you. They were either going to a competitor, or they weren't using anybody in your category whatsoever. And so you either want them to start using a product or service in your category, or you want them to shift from using a competitor product or service or offering to using yours. So fundamentally, sales and marketing, or marketing and sales, is the business of changing behavior. And therefore, unless you understand, why people behave the way they do, what cognitive biases people have, how they operate, it's very, very difficult to be good at marketing, even with all the other, all the other disciplines that you've got and all the other knowledge that you've got. So it's not negating the marketing things. You need to know that as well. But so for me today, when I see people in marketing, I'll say, go and read some of the behavioral psychologists. Go and read what they're saying. Go and read about influence and persuasion, from the Caldinis to the Ariellas because unless you understand some basic psychology about the human condition and how human beings work, I think it's quite difficult to execute marketing in any, serious level and be good at what you do.
It's funny because I'm trying to flip it on its head to create the traits of a great marketer, and it's someone who studies psychology, who's regularly, almost daily, speaking to their target audience, their customers, who has that. I mean, from a digital perspective, mathematics is very important just to be able to understand funnels and so on, but it's not essential. But what sort of characteristics have you seen in great marketeers that you've come across?
I think the best marketeers I ever meet love people. They love learning. They're naturally inquisitive. They just want to learn. So why did you do that? Why are you interested in that? Why is that your issue? Why, they're naturally inquisitive. And I think if you've got to like people, because actually to be naturally inquisitive about why people behave and why they do the things they do, it's very, very important. So I think one great trait of marketing people is they're inquisitive and they want to learn. Don't ask questions when you've already got the answer in your head. Ask the question with an open mind and be prepared to be surprised or learn or whatever else. So they naturally want to learn. And the other thing, which I don't know whether it will surprise you or not, Marcus, is humility. Because I think the most important thing in marketing is to say, I don't know. Actually, I'm learning every day because markets evolve, markets change, things happen in marketplaces, innovations, different things, they change the landscape. That isn't to over-egg it and say things diametrically change every day. They don't. People over-egg sometimes how significant changes are. But understanding that marketplaces evolve and that I don't know everything, and even what I knew today isn't necessarily going to be 100% accurate for tomorrow. So that natural humility, and I think those character traits actually go together. So the idea of humility and inquisitiveness and learning, I think are really important. And I think the last one, to be a good marketer, is empathy.
Yeah.
Is to be able to, is not to just understand on a logical level about my audience, but on an emotional level, be able to get it and actually say, okay, it's interesting to see what it's like to be in your shoes, and when I say yours, it could be an individual's, it could be an entire audience, but what is it like to be that? Because I think that sometimes people make the massive mistake. I think this is one of the fundamental mistakes of marketing, is that they think everybody's like them, especially if they're part of their target market. I mean, I think one of the best things to be is a 50-year-old bloke marketing a product to 23-year-old ladies, because then you put your hand up straight away and go, I don't understand my audience, so I'm going to have to go and learn, because I'm not a 23-year-old woman, so I don't know what they think and what they feel and how they perceive things, so I have to go and learn. And that's quite good. The worst thing that can happen is to be a 55-year-old bloke marketing to 55-year-old blokes, because then the biggest mistake you think is, well, I'm a 55-year-old bloke and this is what I think, so it must be right. And I'm atypical of every 55-year-old male in the country or on the planet or whatever. And of course, that's not true. So I think sometimes it can be quite helpful to not market to an audience that's anything to do with you, because then it's easier to be humble and easier to say, I don't know this naturally, so I have to go and learn. And sometimes I think where I see marketers get it the most wrong is when, because they're part of the demographic they're targeting, they use themselves as the atypical case study, and that's a really dangerous place to be from a marketing perspective.
The thing that drives me nuts, Grant, when marketers have said to me, well, I wouldn't like that messaging, or I wouldn't buy it. And you're just like, well, you're not the target audience, so I don't really care. And it's, I think the term I came across in a book of psychology, it's called naive realism. So you believe that the way you see the world is how it is, and everyone else is a little bit weird to a greater or lesser extent. So you're the benchmark.
You're the benchmark.
Yeah, and that's how, and it's true, because that's the only thing you've got to go on. But you've got to, like, what I think we were talking about here in these is the difference between like a growth mindset, which an ideal marketer, having a fixed mindset, which is this is how I am, this is how it is, and it's very sort of binary and black and white, rather than being open, going, well, you know, like let's test this campaign out, gather some data, you know, and not be scared if it goes wrong. Because it's, I mean, I love split tests. I love A/Bs. I love sort of, I used to write copy, Grant. I always used to, you know, I used to pit myself against other people in the team with headlines and stuff. And when I'd lose, I'd just, yeah, of course you get that sort of like emotional dump of, oh, that's annoying. But then after you go, wow, well, how on earth did I get that one wrong? How did I misjudge this target audience? Like, what am I not seeing here? Because it will help you become a better marketeer, because there isn't actually any really real losing other than if you don't learn from the split test. You know, but I've dealt with copywriters in the past. I've got very grumpy when their headlines haven't won, and it was the, you know, the creative behind it that messed up the copy or something like that. And it's like, just be open. I think that's the thing. It's being open, being humble, all these things you talk about. But yeah, the naive realism is a tough one, because we walk around in our heads saying, well, this is how the world is, and we judge ourselves. We're very forgiving ourselves. We judge ourselves by our intentions, but we judge everyone else by their actions. And everyone else is judging themselves by their intentions. So we're not kind of going, well, I didn't mean to be that or whatever. So it's getting out of your head, like you say, and just being able to live in other people's shoes from a place of,
and it's quite hard if you've been in marketing for 25 years to get up every day and start from a premise, I don't know anything. Now, of course you know something, of course. But that is the way to do marketing, is to start off every day by going, actually, I don't know anything. You know, I've got to learn. And that's why, for me, you need to be speaking to your prospects and customers every single day. Yes. Because, you know, if you go a few days without speaking to them, you're already forgetting things. You're already putting more bias on things than there are. You know, and that's why when you do speak to them, everything needs to be open-minded. You know, don't try and interpret what they're saying. Listen to what they say. Just take it at face value, you know.
Yeah, it's the thing I'm thinking now is I need to speak to some more customers now. Like, just pick up the phone a bit, and it's true. I mean, I've, you know, had a bit of time off with COVID and everything, and it's time to start speaking and listening, really, and hearing what's going on in the customer's mind, what they're thinking about, what their concerns are, hopes and fears, and just try and understand so we can serve them better, because that's ultimately our job, is to serve. And if we're making assumptions about them, like you say, they could be dated very quickly, and they often are. So that's great. Well, Grant, look, we're coming up to the hour now. If people watching this want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Yeah, the best way, I mean, I'm on all social media, of course, and I've got a slightly unusual name, so which in the days of social media and online is quite a good thing. It's an asset. It wasn't an asset as a school kid, but it is now. But I would say, you know, either just Google my name, and according to Google, I think I'm the only Grant Leboff on the planet, so you'll find me. But the other one is my website is stickymarketing, all one word.com. And that's got loads of video and loads of resource on which people are free to, you know, just access and utilize if it's interesting to them. And you can contact me through that portal as well. So stickymarketing.com.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's been great. Thank you.
Yeah. Hope you have found it useful and interesting. Thank you. 1 second, I'm just going to end.